Greetings, everyone. It's Trey Jadlow. I'm here on this fourth day of August 2023. I'm joined with my new friend here, Dave, whom I met a few weeks ago, maybe a little more than that. And I can't even remember the context. I know that you're kind of new to the street epistemology community.
Yeah.
And asked to have a conversation. Or maybe I did. I don't know who invited whom, but and we were supposed to get together. And I know you had a family emergency, and we weren't able to do that.
It was a fun time.
Yeah, but anyway, thank you, Dave, for joining me, and welcome.
Absolutely. Thanks for meeting up with me. I think you were putting out that you were interested in talking to some people about street epistemology. And
that's what it was. Yeah, because I have. I've been trying to get street epistemologists to talk to me for maybe years now. I don't know. They're kind of shy for some reason. But anyway, they had a widget, I think, on their Twitter page or something, and said, "Would you like to talk to somebody?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, click on the names that you might be interested in." And I said, "Click, click, 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 click." Were you on there? Did somebody else tell you about it?
Yeah, they popped it on the Discord, and I jumped on it.
Was your name one of those on that list?
I doubt it.
Okay.
But, probably next time, hopefully.
Okay. Well, I've had a conversation with Reed Nicewander, who's the head guy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a nice conversation. He did it privately, though. He's not going to post it.
Yeah.
And then with, Doug Pine Creek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he's told me if I invite him again, he will block me. Didn't go too well for him. So anyway,
yeah.
So I'm a big fan of that. That's kind of the methodology I use. Basically, street epistemology is just a Socratic method. And you're just asking people to justify their perspective in order to learn. And then you can also point out inconsistencies that they might have as they give their perspective. And I love it. I love having conversations with people that differ with me, and I love just allowing other people to give their perspective. And it's always, a more charitable way to engage, not usually as heated.
Yeah, that's one of the things I appreciate about it whenever I came across it.
Yeah. So when how did you come into it? I mean, are you familiar with Peter Boghossian either as well?
I stumbled across street epistemology and Peter Boghossian separately.
Okay.
I think I came across Anthony Magnabosco's videos at some point, and
he refuses to talk to me as well.
Yeah. He's been doing this a long time, and I really appreciated his very cordial, very active listening, actually talking about the ideas of people, almost like you were on the same team rather than trying to get you a gotcha. Sure. Or it was no mockery or anything. And I always appreciated that. Like, no matter where I've been in life, that's always been something important to me. Is it feels like most of the time, unless you're talking to somebody who enjoys the mockery, it's not actually useful to moving people one way or the other. It's in my opinion.
Uh-huh. Well, I enjoy kind of a little WWE banter.
Sure.
Did you see my debate with Matt Dillahunty the other day?
Actually, I did. Yep.
Okay.
I did tune in on that.
As I opened up, I said, "Let's get ready to rumble." But I've always been that way. I just like I like having fun too. I mean, it's enjoyable to engage. But anyway, so would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself? And I'll tell you about me too as well.
Sure.
Again, there's no gotchas here or anything like that. I just, whenever I have conversations, I like to get the background of the person I'm talking to, and then, and share where I'm coming from.
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate that. And you don't know me from Adam, and I get it. So I'm new to the street epistemology stuff. I got involved with it by actually finding out I lived near someone who did it. And ended up meeting with them and had a really positive experience and kind of practiced with it. And I've always, in a similar way, enjoyed wrestling with ideas. I've always cared about trying to help people figure out things.
Mm-hmm.
I made a shtick that was a little different to set myself apart is my 2-Day David. So 2-Day David is a man who was born yesterday. There he is. So I go around and I do street interviews and I ask people, so what's something you wish more people believed that, and we can explain it to a person who was born yesterday so that we can build it from the ground up,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to it being like, well, you know what I mean when I'm talking about this. It gives a chance for people to explain their thoughts out. It's non-abrasive, and so far it's been really fun.
Cool. So from a religious perspective, what is your persuasion?
At this stage, I'm just a learning person. I was very heavily Christian for many, many years, and
Were you raised in a Christian environment?
I was, yes.
Okay. We might ask what denomination.
Mainly Baptist-y,
Okay.
non-denominational. The
Okay, sure.
mix and match of that.
The Baptist-y that is not too deep on theology, philosophy, or answering questions, I would surmise.
A little bit of both. Like I played around.
Say, were there people at church that could answer your questions? I guess is what I'm asking. When you have difficulty.
The ones that could, I latched onto, like a leech.
Okay.
It's always been anybody who wrestled with the ideas, anybody who tried to take things and add like more value to it than just believe this and get over it.
Mm-hmm.
I've always latched onto that.
Well, cool. That's great. And you're a family man?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got 2 young kids, and
well, that's great. Congratulations. That's
yeah,
a great
appreciate
joy
it.
of life is having kids. Okay, let's see. I guess that's all I ask you. Okay, so I live in Kansas City. I'm 57 years old. I'm a born again Christian. I'm a Reformed Baptist.
Okay.
And I became a Christian when I was 20 years old. Have you ever heard of YWAM?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was saved in YWAM, although I'm not a big fan of charismaticism. Now it's a charismatic movement.
Sure.
But when I was 20, I was raised in somewhat of a Christian environment. My mom was a believer. My father was not. And my mom is still alive. My dad has passed away. And I didn't really understand what it meant to believe in Jesus, I guess. And so when I would go to Christian camp or whatever like that, I remember one story I just told this the other day. They had at the end of the camp, they have an evangelistic thing, and the kids, go forward. And I was going to go forward, and I'd met a new friend. I think his name was Alex. And I was probably 10 or something or 11. And he's like, "Aren't you a Christian?" Because I was going to go up to dedicate my life or whatever. And I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't know. I don't really know. I want to make sure, whatever." And I just didn't understand what it meant to be born again, to be a Christian. And
This is that YWAM, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Pardon me?
This is that YWAM?
No, it's before.
Okay, yeah.
This is just a Christian camp when I was younger. And so then when I was about, I'm a why person. In other words, a lot of people want to know how things work. That doesn't interest me. My big question, my burning question is why? And if I can't have a reason for something, I can't be motivated. And I have a personality that's like warp 7 or stone cold 0. It's just like, and if something interests me, I really like it. And if I I'm just that kind of person. And so in school, I'm not motivated by money. I'm not motivated by status or power. And so when I was in school, I was basically in high school, just a nobody. I just wanted to get finished with school. I was a CD student in high school. In junior high, I was a BC student. And then when you get to high school, you become a CD student if you don't do any homework like me. And I just wasn't motivated. And I think when I took my ACT test, I think I got a 9 or an 11 on it. And I just wasn't, I was sick too when I took it, but I just didn't care. I just said, I want to get done because this is hard work. I don't see a reason for it. It doesn't interest me at all. None of this stuff. I don't see a purpose in it. So anyways, I went there and then I flunked out of college shortly thereafter, of course. Went to junior college and I went to KU for a semester and flunked out. And I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And I'm a very timid person by nature. And so anyway, my mom was always, of course, encouraging me towards spiritual things as a Christian.
Sure.
And at our church, there was a YWAM missionary that came and spoke. And so she took me there, hoping I would go on. One of their big things is short-term outreaches to other countries. And they also have a school. And so I went to that. And after I went to that, I was like, I told my mom, I said, I want to go to the school. She's like, whoa. She was hoping maybe I'd want to go on a short-term outreach or something. But I was wanting to dedicate myself to going to this year-long program they have. And what it is, it's 2 semesters of, you have 3 months in class, and in 2 months you go on the field, missions field somewhere. So I did that in 1986. My mom went down to this chicken farm, rehabilitated chicken farm near Fayetteville, Arkansas, and dropped me off in this old chicken farm. And she dropped me off, and then I was all alone. It was really kind of bizarre. It was kind of surreal. But anyway, there probably, I don't even know exactly when it was, but sometime in that fall, I understood through classes that to become a Christian means that you give your life to Christ. You no longer live for yourself. He is your Lord and Master in everything. And when that clicked in my mind, everything changed, and I was born again. And my life just completely changed at that point in time. All right. So then I went through the training, and I stayed on for a little while. And I actually met my wife. She was in class with me. She's Hispanic, and she grew up in San Fran, California. And we got married, had our first child, and then came back up here in 91. And sadly, all right. So I've been a Christian for 37 years almost now. So I was very heavily into the prophetic movement. I don't know if you ever heard of the Kansas City Prophets.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was involved in it's Kansas City Fellowship at the time. Now it's called IHOP.
IHOP.
Yeah, and I got jumped, full into that, and was there for about 4 years, I would imagine, or something like that. And then, the prophets started molesting the women. And I said, well, I'm done with it. And then went to a vineyard. You heard of vineyard?
No, I'm not familiar with that one.
Vineyard is...
I should talk about grapes.
Yeah, well, it's John Wimber. He's one of the Righteous Brothers originally, I think, that started this. It's a charismatic movement. It's not something I don't recommend again. Went to that church for a year, and it was just a waste of time, really, just all about entertainment and stuff. And I said, and I found out after I left, the pastor was sleeping with the worship leader. And I said, enough. I'm done with the charismatic movement. And so I went to a Bible church. We went to a Bible church. And so I left the charismatic movement at that time. Anyway, so I've got 6 kids. And so in migration, I just became more and more, I don't know if you heard of it, Reformed Protestantism. I'm a confessional Baptist. Our Reformed Baptists follow the 1689 Confession of Faith. So anyway, I went through, got influenced by Calvinism by R.C. Sproul, and then enjoyed James White anyway became a Reformed Baptist. And I've always been, my mom is a Presbyterian, and I was raised a Presbyterian, but she's really a non-denominational Baptist who goes to Presbyterian church. And so I've always been a Baptist. Anyway, but my wife and I had 6 children. My oldest is 33. My youngest is 20, 3 boys and 3 girls. And sadly, I'm divorced. My wife left me the divorce was final about 10 years ago. She probably started started checking out way before then. Yeah. So it's kind of a bummer.
And your whole life. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And the Lord has been amazingly gracious. So my life is, I can't decide now if I'm happier now or when I first got saved. So life is very good, though. Thank God. I didn't expect that either. But anyway, and I'm a dental lab technician. So I make crown and bridge work for dentists. Mm-hmm. And I have my own business, just one-man shop. I like to be able to have the liberty to listen to stuff. I'm an audiophile. I'm kind of an autodidact, too. I like to just learn stuff on my own. And I love metaphysics. I love philosophy too, especially the older style ancient philosophy. I'm not too much on the post-Kantian stuff, but enjoy thinking about things and wanting to know, like I said, why for something, and that's the thing that this fascinates me. So that's what happened when I became born again. Finally, it was like the light went off. There's a why to existence. There's a purpose. There's a God and there's a purpose to my life. And my whole outlook, I went from black and white to, Technicolor, just like that when I became a Christian. And I just saw purpose in learning things and growing and living towards some goal or purpose. So that's pretty much all about me. Do you have any questions? Anything I said?
I have a feeling we're going to retrace a lot of that stuff as we talk about the subject at hand. But my goal for this conversation is to make Christian theology as accessible to as many people as possible. My goal is to simplify the questions in a way. I mean, you can't simplify certain things to a certain degree, but my goal is to kind of, I know what you mean by Reformed Baptist. I know the tenets of Calvinism, but I don't think everybody does. And I'm thinking maybe we could break it down as the process to kind of figure out how someone who knows nothing, has no context, wasn't raised in that home, doesn't have the West of the perspective for all this time, can come to that same conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let me challenge you a little bit there. Because the goal is not to make Reformed Baptist Calvinism accessible to everyone so they can understand. The goal is to find out what's true.
Sure.
So I don't want to go to someone whose view that I don't think is correct. I don't want to help them to make it more accessible. I want to help them to find what I perceive to be true. And I'm not saying necessarily what I say is absolutely true necessarily, whatever the view may be. But our goal should be, I appreciate your desire. You need to make it simplified. It's one of the things I like about R.C. Sproul. He was you ever heard of R.C. Sproul?
Mm-hmm. I know R.C. Sproul, yep.
His gift was to take the high level theology and simplify it so that regular people could understand it. He was a master. I consider him to be not the greatest theologian, not the greatest philosopher, not the greatest logician, the greatest unified thinker of the 20th century, in my opinion. The man was just, to me, in my opinion, was a genius. So that stuff that I was interacting with Matt with, and my apologetic altogether, it's almost completely just flat out from R.C. Sproul. Mm-hmm. He has a series called Defending Your Faith. In fact, I'm teaching it to the young people in my church right now, young adults. And it's when I discovered it, I think it was around 2010. I think it's when it came out or something. My mind just exploded. I thought there's nothing even remotely in the same category. And it's the technique itself. The arguments that he's using are not new. There's nothing new about it. But the way that he formulates it, I think, is very helpful. And like, for example, I got the four possibilities arguments that I was trying to get through with Matt. That's R.C. Sproul. He said if something exists, there are only four possibilities. And the way that he formulates that argument, like I said, I said to Matt, I've been doing this 10 years, maybe nearing 15 years. I had not once ever had a serious rebuttal, let alone a defeater for the argument, because it's analytically true. It's if you grant logic and if you grant sense perception, in other words, that we exist and that we are not self-existent, it necessarily follows that there must be a self-existent being that gave being to us. Matt, I'm sure you didn't recognize it. None of the people in the comments seem to recognize it, or almost of them. He was running scared.
That's a little unkind.
What's that?
That's a little unkind. It's saying I didn't recognize something. You haven't even cross-examined me yet on this.
Oh no, I am presuming that you are like nearly everybody else that saw that debate. I mean, he was, and if I offended you, I apologize. But I'm just saying.
No, I like us talking about it as opposed to making assumptions on each other. That's all.
Okay. Well. Okay. Then strike that I said that. Kanga, no. Well, let me just say that Matt was in pure defensive mode, and I couldn't figure it out for a while. And then I realized it, and I realized I saw some of his. He's done shows on cosmogony in the beginning of the universe and stuff. And so he knew the argument was unassailable, so he just decided he wasn't going to go there. That's my opinion. Hey, Louis, I'm on a call. All right. And so he just refused to engage it. He said, "Well, I don't know if I exist." But he actually, in our I think it was in a Q&A, once or twice, he basically said, "Well, there might be a necessary being. Necessary being is a philosophical category for self-existent being." And he goes, "But it's not personal." So he actually knew the argument. He was conceding the argument, but he did not want to go there straight out. That's my perception of his argument. And I've never had anybody obfuscate like that from the very beginning. But anyway, and that's how compelling the argumentation is. And like I said, I've not had a serious challenge yet, and maybe you can offer one.
Well, let's start from the beginning. So this is David. He was born yesterday, and you have a belief that you want him to understand. What is this belief?
That there is a self-existent, volitional, moral God of the universe. Okay. And as we begin our little stroll down epistemological understanding about reality, I will ask you the same that I asked Matt, which nobody's not granted these. The tools for inquiry, which are logic, or the law of non-contradiction specifically, and the basic.
Define that before we move on to the other two. If you don't mind, that's just make it as accessible as possible.
Okay, Aristotle delineated 3 laws of thought: the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, and the law of the excluded middle. And basically, to simplify it, we'll just say the law of non-contradiction, which means something cannot be and not be at the same time in the same relationship. It's considered to be the foundation for all. Because if you deny law of non-contradiction, Aristotle said that you end up with the principle of explosion, which means that all inquiry explodes into nonsense. So, for example, if I say that I'm a man and there's no law of non-contradiction, it is also true that I am not a man. You know, the exact opposite of every assertion that you make is true at the same time you make some assertion. So everything becomes
So we got the basic reality. Okay, yeah. I'll grant it.
So and nobody has ever not granted me that, because they understand all science. And when I say science, I don't mean like people talk about science, they mean empirical science. When I say science, I mean it in the original sense of sciare. In Latin, it just means knowledge. You know, there is no knowledge unless you can have coherence to filter ideas through.
Sure.
Are you familiar with presuppositionalism? You ever heard of that?
I am. David's not. There he is. It's flipped.
Okay. I don't want to be too verbose, but presuppositionalism states that, and as I talked about in my...
and why are we talking about presuppositionalism? Like, so let's discuss why we even are talking like this. Like how you have this belief that this God is here. Why do we start with these kind of things?
Because we're defining our tools for inquiry.
Okay.
And the way in which we are going to get this information, it's got to come in a way that is, well, like you said, we want to be as simple and as easy to understand as possible. And so defining your terms and defining your paradigm is essential to being able to understand how we're going about to find this conclusion that I have asserted. Okay. So just quickly, I'll just say presuppositionalism basically says you cannot have any true knowledge unless you presuppose the God of Christianity, the God of Scripture. All right. And the problem with that is it commits what's called the petitio principii fallacy, which means the fallacy of begging the question. Anytime you have an argument, and if your conclusion is found in any of the premises of your argument, this is the thing you're supposed to be proving. You can't assume it up here as part of your argument. And that's what presuppositionalism does. They assume their answer in their argument. They got to start with God in order to get to God. And the reason I'm bringing that up specifically is because they accuse me of being presuppositional as well, because I'm asking for the presupposition of logic. And the difference to me, from them, is that to assume logic is an instrument for inquiry.
Okay.
It's not a material proposition. Okay. Logic has no content. So I'm not assuming the content. I'm just saying this is an instrument that we have to have.
Okay.
And so I'm not committing the petitio principii fallacy. Yeah. And that's why every atheist I talk to, they grant me that. It's called classical foundationalism.
Good to go.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So we got to have a law of non-contradiction. And then secondly, we've got to have the basic reliability of sense perception. And of course, the caveat always is that our senses fail us. We make mistakes all the time.
Sure.
But our senses are the only connection we have to this world around us. So we've got to go with what we've got and say,
look for a reasonable inference.
That's right. We've got to be able to come up with a reasonable inference if we're going to have any statement about this reality in which we live.
Okay. Sure.
So law of non-contradiction and basic reliability of sense perception. So those two instruments, they're not material propositions. They're just instruments for inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
I make the statement that if something exists, there are only four possibilities. Okay. And the first possibility is that which exists is an illusion. The second possibility is that which exists is self-created. And the third one is that which exists is self-existent. And then lastly, that which exists is created by something that is self-existent. And I was arguing that, going back and forth with some guy on Twitter today who was saying, well, how do you know those are only four? And I said, well, I don't have certainty. I don't have certainty about anything.
Sure.
I mean, other than existence, I think.
How certain are you about that proposition on a scale of 1 to 10?
Of what?
Of the four, there are only four potentials.
Well, I would say at this point I'm a 10.
Yeah.
Because nobody has offered another one. I mean, Matt tried flailingly. He was just laughably wrong on that. But
what would another one have to include? How is there a way to falsify that?
That's to falsify it would be to bring up another alternative, and I've never heard one. So, in other words, the first two are unreasonable, which Matt pointed out. He thought he was cutting a fat hog in the belly. Of course, that's the whole point, is to show that only one of those is actually viable. But people will sometimes say, "Oh, everything's just an illusion. It doesn't matter, whatever." And it's like, okay,
it's worthless thought. Kinda doesn't go anywhere. Yeah.
Well, and the problem with that is, have you ever heard of René Descartes? We talked about this in the debate a little bit.
Yeah.
Cogito ergo sum.
Yeah.
I think, therefore I am. So.
Yeah.
And this is what Descartes was living in, a time of great skepticism, because you had the Reformation, where he was in the 17th century, but in the 16th century, you had the Reformation happen, and the entire edifice of the church was broken up. And you had this kind of dogmatic structure where if you had a question, go to the church. They've got the answer. There's no question. Well, that all kind of exploded with the Reformation, and you had the priesthood of all believers, and you had the church not having all the answers to stories. So it was a great time of upheaval in society at that time. And you also had, I don't think there was so much with early modern physics in his time. I'm trying to think, there was something else too that was causing a lot of consternation on people. And so Descartes had this time of great upheaval in his own life, and he's like, I need to know what I can count on, that I can go to the bank on, that I can. And he was a rationalist. Sure. And basically saying, what can I climb into my Dutch oven and inductively or deductively know without any, because your senses are difficult.
Sure.
This Hume's basic thing was, our senses are always wrong, therefore we don't know anything. And so he was saying, what can I not doubt? And he said, well, if I got a doubt, then there's a doubter. There's got to be a thinker.
Sure.
And if there's a thinker who's doubting, then it must be. So everything else, and for my argument, all I need is me, really. I don't care about solipsism. That's fine. I could be the only reality. So, I think therefore I am. So everything is not an illusion because who's asking the question? There's got to be somebody asking the question. So number one doesn't work. All right. Everything is not an illusion.
Can I ask you a quick question before we go through all four of these? Does this thought exercise of the four possibilities, does this lead to the Christian God that you're positing?
Yes, of course. I'm a Christian, so yes, of course it does.
Could you?
If Matt would have taken me through, we could have gone through that, but he didn't even want to engage the argument. And here's the thing. Here's what I'm starting with, David. All right. And this is what I was telling Matt. If you're going to say that God has revealed himself, you don't start with the revelation. If you're an atheist, you start with God. Okay. Mm-hmm. And this is why I focus on the existence of God, because it's an analytical argument. You cannot deny it. And so if I'm debating somebody and they say, well, they won't rebut the argument. All right, four possibilities are they will not rebut it. And they say, well, let's just move on. I said, okay, that's fine, but you need to confess that either a creator, self-existent creator exists, or you're just obfuscating and you're not being honest about the facts. And you're just saying, well, I can't rebut it, but we'll go ahead. And I'll go ahead in that state, but I want them to say, I cannot rebut your argument. I can't find a problem with it. And I've never had anybody, like I said, not as I've been defeated, I've never even got a rebuttal, not one, ever, not a valid one. So if you're going to sit there and tell me, oh, well, tell me about the Christian God, but I'm not going to acknowledge when you just proved, I'm not evidencing God here. I'm proving it. It's a proof. It's a mathematical proof, okay, by modus ponens. If a creation requires a creator, then it necessarily follows that a creator exists.
Well, I mean, that sounds a little bit like using linguistics to just kind of define it into reality. I mean, if a creation assumes that a creator, I believe is that
okay.
circular?
I think the thing that you're tripping up on is the language there. And so we probably should just continue on.
Sure. Let's just go on.
Okay.
No problem.
So we know that it's not an illusion. The second possibility is that which exists is self-created. Can you imagine what the problem might be with that?
It sounds almost identical to self-existent.
No, it's not. Self-created, the reason that doesn't make sense is because it violates the law of non-contradiction. This is why I asked for it in the beginning. Something cannot be and not be at the same time in the same relationship, okay? In order to create myself, I would need to exist before I existed.
Granted.
Next. Yeah, all right. So the third option is that which exists is self-existent, okay? And anything that is self-existent must be immutable or unchangeable, because change is a reduction of potentiality to actuality. I always like to use the example of my hair. I am actualizing the reality of baldness on my head, okay? I'm changing. And I'm a composite being. There are many things in me that are going on in my genetics, sure. And there are things that are acting upon me externally also. And anything that moves from being potentially something to actually something, that is to say, it changes. This is Aristotelian thought. It must be affected by something outside of itself that is already actualized. Because to be pure potential is to be nothing. So, like I'm saying, I'm potentially. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger with my muscles, okay? You could say something like that. Like, I'm going to work out, I have the potential to have larger muscles than what I have now, okay? But anything that I interact with must be in a state of actuality and not potentiality. And anything that is a composite of act and potency, or that had to be created, cannot be self-existent. For example, you agree that you were born, right?
Yeah, yesterday.
Yeah, and or 2 days ago, is it? Oh, I guess it will be yesterday. So okay.
Yeah, you get it.
All right. So, therefore, since you were born, you were dependent upon your actual parents to bring you into existence, right?
Sure.
Okay. And if you want to take that back as far as you want to go, anything that changes, you cannot have an infinite regress of potentialities that were actualized, because to be potential is to really be nothing. In other words, it's when you're actual is when you actually have that property. Okay. Like I'm actually bald. Okay. So you cannot have an infinite regress of potential beings, potentialities become actualized, because it would be similar to the second notion in that you'd have to have something from nothing. And so somewhere, somehow, there must be something that has the attribute of self-existent that gives rise to everything that is contingent or dependent existence. Another way of putting it is to say that the entire universe cannot be dependent independently. That would be like a violation of law of identity. Independent is independent. Dependent is dependent. Okay, you can't be independently dependent.
Sure,
it's irrational. So the only logical conclusion is that there is something somewhere that has the attribute of self-existence.
And we're sure that that is the Christian God. Maybe is there a possibility that the Christian God was created by something even bigger than him, and he's just another contingent being?
Sure, but do you concede the argument?
That's a very vague phrase. Can we?
Do you see any problem with my argumentation?
So that there has to be something that is non-contingent to exist
in order for contingent being to exist.
Is that also having to grant that something is personal and changing?
And changing? No, it can't be changing. The ultimate reality cannot be changing, because then it would be dependent on whatever brings it to its new state of existence. It has to be eternal, unchanging, self-existent. To be self-existent means that you're not dependent on anything else. You cannot change by definition.
So how would there be any actual interaction with the thing? I mean, once it made anything, it changes, correct?
No, it has active potency, but not passive potency. For example, when you walk on the sand on the beach, you see that you make footprints.
Sure.
On the sand, but if also you look on your heel there, the sand has made an indentation on your foot as well.
Sure.
So the footprints are active potency. The indentation is passive potency. You're changing. So God has the capacity for potency, but only active potency logically. I mean, this is just a logical necessity. The Greeks, by the way, got this stuff down. Aristotle, Plato, the pre-Socratics, even, the apeiron, the ultimate reality. They had these things. It has to be spiritual as well, because materiality is limited by space.
Okay, so we have material, we have essentially the universe, everything contingent on one thing. How do we get from that to a personal interaction, and then even more so to the Christian God?
Okay, so we're a lot farther than we got with Matt, thankfully. So the next step would be a personal God. All right. And so Matt said, well, there might be something necessary, but it's not personal. All right.
Why is that the next step?
Well, where would you like me to go?
Well, I mean, how did you get from a non-contingent existence that preceded everything that is contingent to a personal God? Like, how do we get from point A to point B on that one?
Well, that's what we're discussing next.
Sure. Yeah, go on then. I'm sorry.
I'm not just asserting it. I'm saying that's what we're going to talk about next.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So to be personal is to be volitional. In other words, to have goals, to be teleological, to say this is something to move toward. Okay. Mm-hmm. And what that is to say that it must be intentional. All right. And the Darwinists will say, and the atheists will say that intention. Well, I'll say today, would you agree that you are an intentional being?
That I have goals that I have
are you having a goal with this conversation?
Sure. If that's the definition, sure.
Okay. And so my assertion is going to be that if there's something intentional now, only one thing in the whole universe, intentionality, that has a goal or purpose, there must be something eternally intentional, because unintentionality cannot intend intention. All right. It's the law of identity. We're invoking the law of identity, law of non-contradiction as well.
Okay.
So something cannot, I like to use the example, let's imagine the entire cosmos is in a circle. I think I talked about this in math too. And the entire circle is unintentional. And this is what the atheist will say. It was unintentional, and then people I'm blanking here. It was unintentional, and then it evolved intentionality for the purpose of survival. And what that is, it's just a magic talk. That's not reason they're doing there. It's just one of Rudyard Kipling's Just So stories. Unintentionality, if the entire universe, the whole thing, were unintentional at some time in the past, we would have today unintentionality, because unintentionality cannot be intentional by definition.
Trey, I'm going to be completely honest. This is a difficult process to follow. We said the word intentional, unintentional about 16 times in the one paragraph.
Yeah. Well, it's really quite simple though. But if something, just imagine something in your mind is purely unintentional. Okay. Or let me try this.
Okay.
It's called the principle of proportionate causality, and it's a principle that says that something can only cause something in something else, which it itself, the causer, has the capacity for. For example, I cannot pass on the ability to my children to fly like a bird. I don't have that capacity. Okay. Rocks, I'll use this example. Rocks do not create philosophical societies. Would you agree with that?
I don't know.
Rocks are not intentional.
I mean,
I'm not saying that as an absolute statement, but generally speaking, wouldn't you say rocks don't have philosophical societies, as far as you know?
As far as I know.
Yeah. Okay. And so can elephants give rise to Boris Yeltsin's, the man Boris Yeltsin? Now you could say, well, yeah, it could possibly, but I'm saying, generally speaking, in other words, is there some order to this universe in the way things happen?
Yeah, that was one of our initial things we granted here. But what I guess what I'm trying to understand better is you're saying that there has to be something that has an intention. So you're saying there has to be some kind of mind for things to move in the first place?
Well, or I don't know what you mean by mind, but
I shouldn't use that word. You haven't used that word. I'm sorry.
Something with the capacity for volition, a volitional being, something that has purpose or goal with it. And I mean, I don't have a problem with mind, but some people think that the mind is purely physical. And if that's the case, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that which can move toward a certain goal for a certain reason.
And tell me how that leads to the Christian God. Okay,
so you agree that unintentionality cannot be intentional? It's a law of identity.
I guess some of the things we haven't defined is, is existence intentional?
No, is there intentionality in our existence? And you would not doubt that, because you're obviously you're.
Can we have the capacity for intentionality?
Yeah, you are seeking to live, are you not?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
you're an intentional being. Right? You're intending something.
And all that come from like one giant intentional push.
Well, it must be something that caused it. Cannot be something that's unintentional. Something that caused us cannot be unintentional, because then it would be intentionally unintentional, which is a violation of the law of identity.
Sure.
And a law of non-contradiction.
Let me just say, I love talking about this kind of stuff, but I feel as though I can get lost in the weeds in this a long time. And just want to let you know, I'm not trying to hurry you along in any way. But I think, well, I'm going to concede that, although I'm a little wishy. I don't think we've super well defined it. All I have to say is, okay, so the universe exists, the cosmos, and there appears to be some type of movement, something that things move and they don't not move. I mean, that's a law of non-contradiction. I believe I'm following your logic now. How does that lead us to the Christian God?
Okay, so hold on just a minute. All right, so we have a self-existent creator.
You didn't say creator. We didn't agree to create. We just said that. Well,
and this is what I meant by a creation requires a creator. We've kind of gone through that now.
Yeah, you're trying to say self-existent creator in this. Is there a possibility for something that it's self-existent, that didn't create itself, that is not personal? That, I mean, what I'm trying to say, I believe we're going back over each other here. But it feels like I'm running into the same thing, and somebody point out in the comments here. I mean, we both have infinite regressions. Like in my skepticism of this and in your proposition. I mean, ultimately,
how is there an infinite regress? I don't see it in my case.
I mean, either way, either God or the cosmos goes back to infinity.
So here's what I want to say. I want to say dogmatically, there must be two types of being in the universe. We know that contingent being exists. Contingent being cannot create itself before it exists. Therefore, there must be another being that is self-existent. So there's two types of being in the universe: contingent being and necessary being.
But wouldn't a being that creates something, like if the only thing that exists, are we saying that the only thing that exists at that time is that uncontingent being?
Yes.
So wouldn't, if it's a full circle, like if everything is in a full circle and that thing creates something, is it not just changing itself? Isn't that just a change?
No, that's pantheism. We don't believe that we are God. We are dependent creatures that were created by God.
But where did he make us if he's everywhere and everything already?
Well, he created X. This is the necessary corollary. He has the fiat power to create things out of nothing.
But where was nothing if he was everywhere?
Where was nothing? Nothing is the absence of something.
So,
and it's not saying God is everywhere. It's just saying God is
everything.
Reality. He is pure being.
Was there anything that existed outside of God before God?
No.
Was there space or time or?
Well, space and time are contingencies. You would agree with that, right?
I mean, yeah. That's why I'm confused here.
Contingent means dependent.
Sure.
In other words, if something is dependent, if it didn't have that upon which it depends, it wouldn't exist.
But I'm just trying to figure out, if God is everything and he creates more, where does the more go?
I'm not saying God is everything. I don't know what that means.
Well,
I'm not God.
He is the only thing he is the.
He's simple. He is one essence, singular essence. Simplicity is another one. That's another kind of a deep one to get into. But he can't be made up of parts. Anything that's made up of parts requires a composer, because it's not what it is until the parts come together to make it what it is. So he's got to also be simple.
How does he have a mind if he's one essence?
What do you mean?
I mean, if it was one, if you had a circle and you filled it in completely and as one color, there's only one thing in there. There's nothing that is different. There's not different parts to work with.
Okay. Well, okay, Nate, you're describing now what are called accidental properties. So these are properties of things that we participate in, but they are not definitionally what we are. For example, I am at the basic level, I'm a composite being of the substantial, Aristotle says, a substantial form of humanity, and I have existence that's given to me. So it's the what and the whether are put together. And so I will, in my human form I am now, I will have existence taken from me when I die in some sense. So at the very base, we are a composite form. We had our substantial form is given life at some point. But I also have many things that I participate in. Hair is another thing. Hair is what's called an accidental property. That means it's something that I participate in, but I'm not definitional of the thing. So if I don't have hair, I'm still Trey.
But I feel like that's you're describing things that are only partially dependent on you, whereas the situation with describing God, everything is 100% dependent and contingent on God in this scenario. Mm-hmm. And in that way, if God is the only thing that exists, he's either creating more, which is more than 100%, or having to rearrange part of who he is.
Okay, I'm not sure what you just said, but let me continue on a little bit with the analogy. I wasn't quite finished. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you weren't interrupting at all. So we have what are called accidental properties. A great example that I like to use is love, for example. If I am loving, I am Trey. If I am unloving, I'm still Trey. Love for me is an accidental property. Do you know what the Bible says about God when it comes to love?
A few things, maybe. Which one? What you want to talk about?
God is love. That's what the Bible says. It doesn't say God has love. I have love. Okay, it's an accidental property. God does not have accidental properties. Everything that he is the perfection of it, and we merely participate with it in examples of it here on this earth. So, so from a classical theist perspective, everything that we see finds its every positive quality finds its being in the being of God, but these are not separate things that cobble together in God. It's basically just saying God. So, for example, Plato used to ask this question. He'd say, "What is justice?" And or Socrates, and he would say, "What is justice?" And people would say, "Oh, it's getting the right thing." And he goes, "No, I'm talking about not an explanation of how it works. What is it? Or what is the color red? Tell me, what is it?" And so from a Christian perspective, I don't know if Augustine was a Neoplatonist before he was a Christian, and he actually synthesized Platonic thought with Christianity. And that's not to say that Christianity was compromised. He just said Plato got so many things right. And so early Christianity was called Christian Platonism. And I myself, I'm a Christian Platonist. I consider myself such a thing because he got so many things right. And I don't know if you're familiar with the philosophy of Plato, but he said there's this theory, there's this realm of the forms. It's the perfections up here. And then there are imperfect examples here in this world in which we live.
Sure.
And so what the Christian would say is, yes, there is a realm of perfections, but basically it's just God. To simplify it, I might say ideas in the mind of God. All right. They find their meaning within God.
I don't mind to cut you off, but I feel like we're talking a little further down the road with this, and I'd like to understand a few more building blocks before I can get there. Is that okay?
Sure.
So, is my microphone still working? I just stepped on the cord. Cool. So let's say that there is something that has intention. The universe has intention. How from there would we get to the Christian God?
Okay, so we have a self-existent creator, and then we have a self-existent, personal, intentional creator, and from there we get a personal, intentional creator that has revealed himself.
Personally, I apologize. I trailed off one of your thoughts. Can you start that over?
Sure. We have a self-existent creator. Okay, that was the first point. The second point is we have a or that self-existent creator is an intentional personal being.
How do we get from
because we're personal? He's got to be relational too. We're relational, right?
Why does he have to match us?
We have to match him. That's the point. It's principal proportion causality. Or there's another term that says a Gary Sequitur essay. Work follows being. Okay. In other words, something acts according to its nature, to what it is. And we can't have something that doesn't have the capacities that we have, because it would need to pass that property on to us. And if he doesn't have that property, then he cannot give it to us. He can't be lacking something either. If to be personal is the better to be impersonal, then the creator cannot lack that quality.
Let me ask you this. It seems there is a... If someone were to tell David back here and say, look, the world seems pretty logical. The seeds go in the earth, the rain comes down, the plants neutralize, the flowers grow. Everything has a preceding thing, as we said before. And it seems to go all the way back until a point we can't time anymore. What evidence do you have that there is something that goes beyond, or maybe not evidence? How did you get to the conclusion that there is something that goes beyond the natural flow of things? How do you know there's not just one intentional push, and maybe we're a pizza box growing mold underneath a giant alien's bed somewhere? It's a stupid analogy, but how do you know there's not one intentional push and everything else is naturalistic and there's nothing personal involved whatsoever? How did we get to a personal being beyond just the first push?
You mean like deism or something?
If you could call it that.
Okay. It's for something to be dependent. Not only must God create everything in the first instance, but he must uphold it at every moment of its existence. You know, if God were to remove his hand from us, things just wouldn't fly apart. It would cease to exist. Again, to be contingent is to be dependent. I'm sorry?
How do you know that we are contingent beyond the initial existence?
Oh, so you consider yourself to be self-existent now?
No, I'm saying like if my parents have me, I'm their child. I'm contingent on them to exist, but I'm no longer contingent on them after I am actualized.
But you're not self-existent, right? There's only two types of being. There's dependent being and self-existent being.
Well, I'm trying to understand better here. You're saying that there is an undependent being that started everything.
No, much more than that. That sustains things moment by moment. That's the logical necessary corollary.
The thing that we haven't gone over that from my understanding, and maybe I missed it, but from what I understand, we have something had to move things forward, but now you're saying that thing holds it all together, but it's also not dependent on us, and then also everything isn't that thing. You're saying that whenever I described the circle and I said that the God would have to be to create things, he'd have to draw things inside the circle, and you said it's not like that. It's not pantheism, I believe you said.
Well, you agree that you're not self-existent, right?
I'm not talking about me.
Anything that you know, is it self-existent?
I'm talking under the premise of assuming that something caused the cosmos. We're past that point. We're just assuming that something caused the cosmos, whether it's gone back in infinity time or whatever. It came from something.
Is that something self-existent?
Assuming.
Well, it has to be.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you got to see the way.
It's not an evidence; it's a proof.
But that doesn't necessarily prove the personal part.
Well, sure it does, because you're personal, aren't you?
But rocks aren't personal, and they exist.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that everything that it makes has to be personal. That's not what the principle of proportionate causality says. It says that any property that it creates, it cannot imbue it with something it does not have. Certainly, he has the capacity to create inanimate objects, but he cannot have the capacity to create animated personal beings if he is impersonal.
Well, I mean, from what another person who was talking to David, I mean, they could tell him and say, I mean, the mind is made of material, and that you get a head injury and you're not a person, the same person you were. You stop existing to a certain degree if you have a blow done to your physical body.
But you're still personal.
If you stop living, if all your vital organs stop working, if your brain functions, then you die. Then you're not personal.
That's not a defeater.
Those are all contingent on material things. It's not necessarily saying.
Yes, but to say that we have matter says nothing about the reality of personality.
Why not?
Because all I'm arguing for is the fact that personality exists, teleology exists.
If the mind was purely physical, if you had convincing proof that the mind was purely physical.
Well, everything can't be physical. That's a corollary to my argument as well. Everything cannot, because physicality is contingent. Everything can't be contingent.
I'm having trouble connecting the pieces here, and
I think you're having problems with going to where the conclusion leads. Not with the logic of it. It's purely logical. I'm not saying anything that's
I promise. Like it feels like we're talking about two different camps here in my mind, and I'm not. I'm trying to avoid one way or the other as much as I'm trying to figure out how these two are connected. Because just give me a second to think. I don't want to just spit out stuff here.
Sure.
My question that I feel like I'm still trying to understand is, how do we know that the personal part that you're trying to describe and the primary intention movement have to be together? Why can't it just be one? Why can't it just be the movement, just the parent births the child, and then the child has its own life outside of the parent?
Because the parent has to have the quality that it gives, that the child has, and we already you agree. You've already agreed, and I think you still agree that we are intentional beings.
Yeah, but what you're doing is what it feels like you're doing here, and how I'm not following you here is it feels like you're saying they have to have a quality that we have, and because we have this quality, that means they have it. But you're not explaining why they have to have it. You're saying it can't be passed down, but why can't compound complexity develop over different environment pressures?
It can, but that environment cannot be impersonal because it can't intend things without violating the law of identity.
Why does there have to be intention after the first move?
Well, if that first move brings forth intentionality, that's why.
So like if you drop a bag of marbles on the floor, that was an intentionality. But every reaction...
Unless you didn't mean to.
Well, fair enough. We could be God's mistake.
Well, no, because God doesn't make mistakes. We make mistakes. If he made a mistake, then he would be contingent. In other words, mistake is like is you're purposing something else and you're frustrated by something else. That which is self-existent can't be frustrated.
I really want to be street epistemological, but I really just want to ask, but what about the story of Noah and the ark? He literally says he regrets.
That is an excellent question, and it's a valid question. and we're jumping ahead, but
yeah, that's a jump ahead. Just put a pin in that. Just know that
Well, that's a great question, because God is. Let me just answer quickly, okay? Because if God regretted that He made man, and it also says that He parted the waters of the Red Sea with the blast of His nostrils. Do you think that means God has a big nose?
Probably.
No, it's called anthropomorphisms, and what they are is they are accommodated language in order to have you ever accommodated your language to a child to help them understand? And what you're communicating with them is not in detail to the level of clarity you'd like to have, but it's good enough so that you can convey the general idea that you're wanting to share with the child.
Do you feel as though if the Bible were literal in the way that it read without that interpretation, do you still feel that you came to the same conclusion of believing in Christianity the way you do?
I'm not sure what you say. When you say literal, I got to say, what do you mean?
Well, so literal? Just in that God had regrets, would you still believe?
No. If God has regrets, then He's not God.
So why do you think there was no clarification on that?
What do you mean?
Why are
there is clarification? It's the thing is Dave, we live in an age of Christianity. Dr. Sproul used to say we're living in the most anti-intellectual age in the history of, I think he said, in the church or in society as a whole. He said we're not anti-educational, we're not anti-technology, but we are anti-intellectual. And what we do is, and I think it came from Immanuel Kant, basically, in the Enlightenment. The church is at a nadir in many ways. It's like we've lost our ability to think about things. It's called contemplative theology or philosophical theology, where you think about the implications of what the Bible says and you systematize it in a way that makes sense. Let me try to explain this as quickly as I can. When we talk about, when I make up a sentence for logic, every logical sentence I make is made up of a subject and a predicate. Do you agree with that?
Okay, sure.
So we only think complexly with complexity. In other words, we don't think simply, we think linearly. We have to go through it and we have to add something. The dog has a tail. And so I think, okay, I've got dogness, I've got tailness, I'm adding tailness to the dog. And that's how we think. God doesn't think like that. God does not think with complexity. He is simple. Okay. And so in order for Him to communicate with us, He must accommodate Himself, His language, in a way that we can understand. Otherwise, there's no point of contact. He has to use complexity with His language, even though that's not exactly the way that He thinks. But that's the only way that we could understand Him. Otherwise, there'd be no relationship whatsoever. So those are called anthropomorphisms or anthropopathisms. It says that God is angry, or that God has, covers us with the shadow of His wings. Does it mean He's a big chicken? No, it's using number one, poetic, but also a common language to communicate with us.
How do we know what God's thoughts are?
Because He has revealed.
How do we know that He's communicating to us? How do we know what He's communicating?
Because He has communicated us through His Word, and through just like the first two arguments that I gave you, they don't involve the Bible, but God has communicated through nature and through conscience as well, through our minds and through the nature we see around us. That basically those first two arguments are just Romans 1 and Romans 2, creation and conscience. That's how I was arguing. So He doesn't too, and then thirdly, he reveals Himself prophetically through His Word. So
in His Word, you mean the Bible, or?
Well, actually, I mean Christ. The Bible is all about Christ.
So David's talked to a lot of people on the street, and I mean, they say that God speaks to them in various different ways. Some say you should read the Quran. Some people say you should read Harry Potter. I mean, why does a book, how do you know that a book is a communication from a divine being that apparently everything is contingent on?
Right. Well, firstly, let me just address the God of Allah. Most people don't consider Harry Potter to be a religious text that we should follow, but the book of the Quran is. And the problem with Allah is that he is a monad. There's no distinction in persons within Allah. And so Allah is dependent upon his creation for the attribute of relationality. And it's interesting that Muslims will say that Allah he's very capricious. They have no idea love is not a very concrete idea for the Muslim. But so it's not possible for the ultimate reality to be a monad because he is dependent upon creation in order to have that attribute of relationality. To be relational, you have to have a lover and a loved. Okay. And so therefore the God of Islam is contingent because he needs something in order to be all that he is. And therefore he cannot be the ultimate reality.
Okay.
And so we know, here's the thing with the Bible, we know that it is the word of God because, and this is a big criticism of, this is the only reason I believe it, is because of miracle. The purpose of the miracle is to verify that the prophet or the man of God is speaking for God. Nicodemus came to Christ in the night and he says, Rabbi, we know that you're from God because nobody can do these wonders that you do unless God is with him. So the prophets, that's why I don't believe in miracles today. People that claim to do miracles today are, in my opinion, just making things up. We don't have the word of God coming to us anymore. In Hebrews 1, it says, God has spoken to the fathers through the prophets in many various and sundry ways, but today he has spoken to us through his son. In other words, the last prophet was Jesus and his followers, the apostles. And so we don't have any more miracles because we don't have any more of the word of God coming to us. But the only reason I believe what they said is because of the miracles that they did to show that they were speaking for God. Do you know how many miracles Muhammad claimed to make?
Why? Okay, so let me pump the brakes on this, because honestly, it's not really important to me whether or not you find critiques in those books as much as I want to know why the actual book that you're claiming is the one you should go with. And I understand you're doing comparatively to say, I mean, there's a lot of people making distinctions and they don't make sense, and this one makes more sense to me. And I'll follow that. I don't want to go down that rabbit trail. I mean, I think we can both agree that it's hard to be convinced of their claims. Mm-hmm. Sorry to cut you off, but I know you enjoy talking about it, and I enjoy talking about it too. And I'm just trying to stay on focus on that.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess what we can go to now is talk about, and we talked about this in the Q&A. I don't know if you listened to our Q&A at all, but the reliability of the Bible. Was it something that actually accurately portrayed what happened in this day? And I don't know if you want to go with the manuscriptural evidence or the trustworthiness of the authors.
Let me ask you a question first on that, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. If you didn't have the Bible, do you still think you would believe in Jesus?
How would I know about him?
So I'm wondering.
No.
Is there any other way to know?
No.
So how do we go from this is a book that some people say that the claims are true to this is a evidence for things that happened that were miraculous, and thus you have to trust it to a certain degree. How do we have that trust if we don't have any kind of experience otherwise?
And what do you mean by experience otherwise? Oh, because we don't see miracles today. Why would we believe in miracles then?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question I'd like to discuss.
Okay. Well, the question that we need to ask then is, were the authors of the Bible accurate recorders of what actually happened in first century Palestine? And the example that I give is the example of Sir William Ramsay. He was an archaeologist from Scotland who was part of the Two Vision School, which is F.C. Bauer. It's a liberal school of higher criticism, basically, in the late 18th, or late 19th, earliest 20th century. Sure. And he was taught that the book of Acts was written 100 years later than when it was purported to have been written. And so he said, and he was a full believer, and he wasn't a Christian. And he said, I'm going to go and verify this, that the book Luke Acts used to be one book, was written at 100 years later, because archaeologically you can do that. You can pinpoint stuff that exactly, within 100 years. And so he went there and checked it out for accuracy. And he actually, hold on just a minute. He went there and devoted his entire life to looking at the archaeologically verifiable artifacts that are talked about within the book of Luke. And he came back saying that Luke is a historian of the highest degree. You can push his narrative as hard as you want, and he will be considered to be absolutely trustworthy and faithful. He said he is among the greatest of all historians. Sir Edward Russell. Sure.
And I apologize. I just want to.
You're welcome to jump in at any time. I'm not offended at all.
If you didn't have the historical reinforcement, like the historians backing up the fact that there are some historical events that happen that are recorded that appear to match. If you didn't have that, would you still believe?
No, if you can't verify it. For example, like the Book of Mormon.
Before you found that out?
Say again?
Did you believe before you found that out? Before you learned about all the historical...
If I were to give my life to Christ and then find that the Bible is not historically accurate, I would not be a Christian.
But I'm saying, what convinced you initially? Like, did you have to have that to understand it?
I'm not saying you have to.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out is like, what's
do you have to know everything about everything in order to place your trust in anything?
That's what I'm wondering. No,
none of us do that.
So, and I'm trying to figure out what some of the more core components are. I mean, those are neat historical things.
It's considered, the Bible is considered to be among the most. Luke was considered to be he was placed in the same category as Thucydides, who was considered the father of scientific history. He's literally one of the greatest historians ever to live.
Does Luke describing a place or an event, a non-supernatural event, accurately prove that a supernatural event happened?
Absolutely not. But it does say that he was accurately representing what happened. And so then once you go from Luke's accuracy, you go to the person of Christ. And Jesus said, not one letter or stroke will pass away until all is accomplished. Okay. And Jesus referred to the scriptures as being accurate all the time. So the general goes to a very specific because of what Christ said about it. And Christ was not just a mere man, but he was a man who claimed to be God. He was the greatest of all prophets to ever live. So his statements about Luke, you get this general reliability with Luke, but then what Luke said about Jesus was even more radical, saying that the Bible truly is the word of God, at least to what he had up to that time. And then you see the apostles referring to Paul, Peter referring to Paul's words as scriptures in 2 Peter. So there's a consistency of reliability of, I focus on Luke's narrative because he's the one that we know the most about, and he has been checked out, like I said, because he gives a lot of information in Acts about places they went, and they got their shipwreck on the fourth missionary journey, and it was this deep at this point. He went there and checked it out and found out it was that deep at that point.
If Luke is correct on 9 things, does that mean the 10th thing is true? No,
it's not saying that everything from archaeology, like I said, you can't verify miracles with archaeology. So but you can say, is he a reliable witness to what happened? And the miracles are the very reason that you want to believe, not the reason you wouldn't want to believe. I'm not going to believe these extraordinary claims unless somebody is giving me signs of miracles that they are speaking for God. Unlike Jim Jones, who just said, believe me and drink the Kool-Aid, you know?
Sure. So let me ask you this. You said you had an emotional experience that led you to God, and I'm not trying to describe.
I didn't say that.
At the camp, I apologize. Tell me what made it click for you. You said that it just clicked when you heard it.
But when I understood that what it meant, I mean, I understand what the gospel was, that God created the universe. We were thrown into a state of entropy or sin when Adam disobeyed. And then from that moment on, God says in Genesis 3:15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed, and he shall bruise you on the heel,
sure,
and you shall bruise him on the head. Or he shall bruise you on the head. And he promised a Messiah who would come.
So I want to make sure we're on the right question here. When you first believed, like what convinced you initially, did you already know about the four possibilities? Did you already know about the historical contextualism? Did you already know about all these things?
No, I did know that there's a creator, and I knew that I was a sinner. Okay, and that's Romans 1 and Romans 2. We all know that. Everybody knows that. All right, they know they're not self-existent. They know they didn't make themselves, and they know that they have a moral standard that they don't keep. Everybody does. I've asked atheists. I said, "You don't believe in God, but do you have a moral standard you keep for yourself?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you keep that?" And every single person says, "No, I don't."
Sure, but I mean, why doesn't that lead you to Allah back then? I mean, you back then you didn't have
because I didn't grow up around Allah. I grew up around Christianity.
So, do you think that someone who doesn't grow up around Christianity, how do they get to the part of trusting it? Did you trust it because people that you trusted vouched for it?
Partially, yeah.
It's just hard for people who don't grow up in it to kind of come to these conclusions. I mean, you've got the really hard philosophical layouts, which are fun, but I mean, do you think that is the way that this intention being that you're describing has intended for people to come to Jesus? You think that was the method what is the method?
God is not seeking to save everyone. That's an important factor, an important piece of information. If he were trying to save everyone, then everyone would be saved. He has made some people for mercy and some for justice.
What does mercy mean?
By sending his own son to die for their sins, to suffer, to live a perfect life, to suffer and die, and to rise on their behalf.
If somebody could show you enough theological draw in the Bible to say that everyone would receive mercy eventually, would that change your view?
That's what people say emotionally, but that's not in Romans chapter 9.
Scratch that question. Sorry. I thought that was going to go somewhere in my head, but it didn't as I fleshed it out. So tell me more about mercy. I'm sorry.
Well, mercy in a strict sense would be like withholding something somebody deserves, not giving them the judgment they deserve. Grace, I think, would be something where God does something positive for that person on their behalf. The example is given of a judge. Let's say, make it a simple thing. There's a judge, and I'm going to court, let's say, and I broke the law. I was speeding. And the judge says, "Here, you have to pay $50." And I say, "Well, I don't have $50." And so the judge takes off his robe, comes around the side of the bench to me, takes out $50 and puts it on the bench, and he goes back and he strikes his gavel and says, "The debt is paid in full." That's what God does with us through Jesus Christ. What we can't do for ourselves, he does for us. And that's not just mercy, that's grace. God's riches at Christ's expense is the kind of the acronym that people say.
So let's say two people go for the judge. One person, man,
he pays it. Let's say this: he pays it for one, but doesn't pay it for the other.
Yeah. I'm trying my best to stick with this 2-day thing, but it's tough because I want to talk in with theological terms, and that's what's holding me up here.
You do whatever you want. I mean,
yeah, I'll do whatever I want for sure. So are you? I mean, you said you're Reformed, so I mean that, and you're Calvinist. So ultimately, people don't have the choice in the matter.
Yeah, they do have a choice, but the Bible says that if in Adam all men are dead in their sins. So when Adam sinned, we lost our capacity to be able to choose to love God. We are all born haters of God, and unless God takes out our old heart, Jeremiah 31, and gives us a new heart, we will not choose him. Jesus said, no man can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up the last day. No man is a universal negative. No man has the capacity to come to God.
What about David? What about
God drew them to him?
So,
but they do have to make a choice. All men have to make a choice to follow Christ. It's not God choosing for us, but he must give us a new disposition in order for us to make that choice, because otherwise we won't do it. We hate him. That's what the Bible says. And people don't like it in contemporary Christianity, but I don't really care what people think. If I'm a Christian, I'm going to follow what the Bible says.
Why? I'm going to ask you questions. You're going to say, I don't know, I'm not God, which I get that. I'm just going to ask you some different questions in a different way. Do you think there is sin in heaven?
No.
Do you think you have free will in heaven?
No more death, mourning, crying, or pain. It says Revelation, new heavens and new earth. It'll be a place where there's no entropy. There's no sadness, no brokenness.
Will there be free will in heaven?
Sure. We have free will here too, to an extent. We just don't have the liberty. We have, what's it called? We don't have liberty. We have, I guess you say we have freedom, but we don't have liberty. We don't have the ability to choose God as sinners, but we have the choice to choose Cheerios over, Cocoa Puffs or something like that, or to help a lady across the street. We have a choice, free choice.
Will I be able to have jealousy in heaven?
Free will? No, because that's an imperfection. You don't want to have jealousy. Jealousy is not something you want to have.
So you can exist as a non-God and have no imperfections.
Adam and Eve did before they fell. They had a mutable state, though.
Well, they were gullible. Apparently, that's an imperfection.
Well, it was a mutable state. They had liberty, or they had what is it called? They were innocent, but they were not righteous. So they had a mutable righteousness. In heaven, we will lose our ability to sin. We'll be better than Adam and Eve.
But if you can't sin, you can only choose good things.
Yes, there will be no inclination toward evil, which is a good thing.
Will there be like any kind of degrees of evil? Like maybe you choose to play a harp one day, but then you play it too loud to your neighbor.
No,
that's a terrible example.
I don't know exactly how it would look either.
How do you think that? What's your thoughts on the story of Lucifer and the falling angel and all that?
Well, there was angels are created before humans, and Lucifer was considered to be the chief angel of Lucifer, the one of light, the light one, and he fell from grace and took a third of the angels with him.
Can I do that if I go to heaven?
No, angels are not humans. Angels cannot be redeemed. Humans can through federal headship. So in other words, the reason that we fell in Adam is, in other words, Adam was our perfect representative. If you were in a garden, you would have done the same thing he did.
And the only way
but we also allows us to be represented in Christ, which means that we're redeemable. The angels are not redeemable. When they sin, they're done.
All this theology is just because it was written in the Bible and we trust the source who wrote it.
And also through reason and natural revelation too. But most of what we're talking about, though, is special revelation, yeah.
You said earlier that you don't think there's miracles today. Do you think there could be miracles today?
Okay, that's a good question. Dr. Sproul used to say, you'll hear me say this all the time because I love it. He said, if it's a prerogative of a woman to change your mind, it's a prerogative of a theologian to make fine distinctions. All right, when I say there's no miracles, I'm not saying there's no supernatural interaction at all. That's not what I'm saying. For me, the way I define that term miracle, and historically this is how we defined it as well, the Puritans would describe it this way. A miracle is for the purpose of verifying the message of a prophet. Okay, no more prophets, no more miracles. All right, but that doesn't mean that God doesn't interact miraculously to help us today. Those would be called extraordinary providences. That's what I would call. That's what the Puritans would call them. An ordinary providence would be like aspirin, or doctors being able to replace hips. Those are graces that God gives us in a natural way, through just learning things. But an extraordinary providence is where something happens where, like, for example, I don't really understand it, but I had a problem with drinking when I was 17, and I couldn't stop. And I wasn't even a Christian. And I cried out to God to help me. That's a very short version, and it was gone. To this day, I don't have it. I don't like it. I can't stand it, but I couldn't stop when I was younger. And I believe that that's God, an extraordinary providence of God to help me with that. And I'm not saying that happens to everybody or anything like that at all. But there's things that happen in your life where God can, and He saves you. Yes, I'm sorry.
Do you believe that God can speak like in an audible fashion, like a direct command today?
I don't like that at all. I can't say absolutely He wouldn't, but remember, I grew up in that world. I grew up in the charismatic world. I've heard more people speak in tongues than most people, and I don't think ever. Some people might be offended. I don't think I've ever heard anything authentic. I think it's just because tongues is a form of prophecy, and I don't think there's prophecy today. So, I can't say dogmatically, but it's not normative. And since I have left the charismatic movement, I find so much more joy in just following what the Scripture says, living by the Bible. It's so much happier rather than try to discern what the Lord is. It almost becomes like a spiritism, or superstition, and I don't care for that. I don't think it's helpful.
I ask if, I'd say you would assume that back in the day they just assumed more miracles were possible.
No,
back in the
day,
that's
why they freaked out.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. One of your children, not the script, I don't know him, I don't care. One of your children, do you have any grandchildren?
Yes.
All right, one of your children says that God told them to sacrifice their son for it to show his obedience. Mm-hmm. They'll show their obedience to God. How could you verify that was actually said, or how would you know? What would they have to say for you to trust them to say something like that?
I would never trust them because God doesn't speak like that. That's what I said. There's no more revelation like that anymore. So if somebody tells me to do that, I say, you're crazy. You need to see a psychiatrist or a pastor or something. You've got problems.
How do we know that was told to Abraham? I mean, it was written down, but how would somebody then and there even differentiate that from a manic episode?
Do you know where that happened?
When it happened?
Where?
I can't remember. No.
It was Mount Moriah. It's the same place where the temple is now. The same place where Christ was crucified.
So you're saying it's used for metaphor and poetry?
No, it's used as a foreshadowing of what God was going to do.
Right, but that doesn't answer the question of how anybody
It's just not some random thing that happened. All this fits within a very tight.
They didn't know that at the time. I mean, that's after.
It doesn't matter if they knew it at the time.
Yeah, but I mean, how does Isaac know to trust his dad that was what he was supposed to do, and not think that never trust his dad ever again because he's manic at this stage. He's hearing voices that tell him to kill him, sacrifice on the altar.
Yeah, but you're presupposing that he was hearing voices and not God.
But I'm saying, how does Isaac trust Abraham to know that that's true?
Well, was there a ram that was provided?
Could it be false and there's still a ram nearby? It doesn't say the lamb just manifested.
It was a ram. Well, yeah, it did. I mean, it's it was there. In other words, when he left, he said, I will return with the boy. And then it said, Father, where's the lamb for the sacrifice? He said, the Lord will provide a sacrifice, my son.
Right.
And the Lord provided.
Yeah, you went up on a mountain and there was a mountain goat. I mean, it's not that outlandish. It's not like
you can see the point.
No, what I'm saying is you could say, I'm going to need a goat, so I'm going to go to the mountains where goats are, or ram, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? This either way. To me, I just don't know how you can trust somebody saying that they hear a revelation. Like, why
is life, from your perspective, David? Why is life so holy? Why are you so appalled that he would sacrifice his son?
Well, one, because there doesn't seem to be any kind of rhyme and reason of it, other than some kind of giant grand narrative that is just for foreshadowing that he could literally just tell a story of instead of actually using real people.
You're not understanding my question. Why is it such a heinous crime to kill your son?
Are we getting into humanitarian ethics? Is that where we're going?
I don't even know what that is.
Not humanitarian. Are we getting into ethics? Is that where we're going?
What do you mean? That's my whole second point was teleology as purpose is what morality is. That life matters. Everything in your life, you live every moment of your life as if life is special. Do you not?
I mean, I waste a lot of time, probably. Watching TV, scrolling.
Well, just saying that you waste time says that you do not do what you should be.
That's a good pull on words. I like that.
So every moment of your life, though, is oriented, not to say you're perfect in it, but you're oriented toward life. If you see, as an example, if you see an old lady who needs help across the street, what's the right thing to do?
It depends on circumstance, but most likely help her.
What's the wrong thing to do?
Maybe drop kick her. There's a few things that could go wrong.
And so her existence matters, right?
Sure.
Okay, why?
She's another thinking, feeling agent. I live in a society which I am codependent on other people thinking and agents. Like if all anarchy broke loose, the power reactors would overthrow and everyone would die.
Is that a problem?
It is a problem.
Why?
Because I want to exist.
Why?
Because I stop breathing and I no longer think and I can't. And I think, therefore I am. It's the only thing I got.
So your existence is objectively holy then?
Set apart. It sounds like a loaded word. Where are you going with this? It sounds like a leading.
No, it's just that it means set apart, special. Is that objectively true though?
To me, it is.
Yeah, but is it that? So it's subjectively true, but not objectively true.
It's objectively in context of my internal existence.
In other words, you know that objectively your life doesn't matter, but you impose meaning upon it because you can't bear to live life the way it really is.
It is the way that it is. And even if on a grand scheme things don't matter, you can watch a movie and just because it's not real doesn't mean you can't feel emotions and be invested in a story.
Yeah, so your whole life is based on fantasy.
Narrative.
Yeah, you pretend that your life is special, but it's not really true.
It's special to me and the people who...
I know, but it's something you impose. It's not really true, though, right?
What do you mean by true?
In the grand scheme of things, let me ask you this. Let's try this. If your life matters, how did you get to determine that life matters? It goes to my second point, unintentionally. In other words, the atheist... I've never gotten a valid answer from any atheist ever on this. What they do is they impose a fantasy upon reality because they can't bear to live their lives consistently when they say that life really doesn't matter. And so if you were created by something that is unintentional, you would not have that feeling that life is special.
No,
whatever created you had to think that your life was special. Otherwise, you would not have that feeling.
My parents thought I was special and they fed me.
Keep going.
Yeah.
As far as you want to go.
And their parents, but that's all contingent on a single line of naturalism. That literally leads you back to at the very least, the first thinking
explosion.
Things. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Listen, David, I've got to go. I've got to get up early tomorrow, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. And if you want to meet again, I'm happy to do that or whatever.
Yeah, sure. Let me ask you some questions. Just I want you to think on for the next time we talk.
Okay.
If you didn't have your 4 things, and you didn't have that one person, like let's say it was 20 years ago, or 50 years ago, or you live in a place that doesn't speak English, and it's very unlikely you run across it. You didn't have the person talking about John being the main, one of the best historians around, him and Q and all the other people who are contributing. What do you think would convince you, and what do you think might convince somebody else? Because to me, it feels like you have a really fun grasp of philosophy and theology and all that stuff, but I don't think that. And I don't think you're actually trying to evangelize entirely. And I think you more or less like wrestling with the ideas, and and like me, you enjoy the challenge of trying to solve.
I love truth. I want to find truth.
Yeah.
That's my passion. But let me leave you with this, David. Imagine that I got a new dishwasher, and then outside on a roof of my house, just randomly, I don't really know how it works. I don't even know what it is.
Okay.
And I find a manual on the roof just randomly, or somebody goes by in a car and throws this thing out, and I look at it, and it doesn't have any pictures though, and I just think, oh, this looks like it might work with my dishwasher.
Sure.
I have very little information, and I trust that manual, and I don't have any reason really to believe it. But if it really is the manual, apart from what my perception is, and I just follow it blindly, will it work?
Well, it depends on what the manual says.
No, I'm saying if it's truly made for the machine, we don't know that as the players in the story.
But what if the manual made for the machine also says, okay, do these things, and then just hope and trust that this is going to work, and that this piece that is not there is going to be there tomorrow?
Well, it's not going to. Okay, do you agree that we all exercise faith? We cannot not use faith.
How do you define faith? I kind of define it as trust, but also in a different way of.
Have you read Boghossian's book, Manual for Creating Atheists?
Actually, haven't.
Okay.
I've read
I've got an audiobook. He says pretending to know things that you don't know.
Definition. I don't think anybody practically does that. Like, I mean, to a certain degree, people do pretend to know. I mean, they use it as a placeholder. But in my mind, faith is more like a shortcut to say, like, okay, we're on this topic. Instead of going from point A to point B, go around this way, because you trust this person. They figured it out, and you may not know this part, but you're not saying you don't. You're pretending to know it, and you do. I mean, you don't know it, but you're pretending you do. You're saying, I may not know it, but there's enough other things around that are making me convinced that I'm just going to float that one unless I have to know it.
Okay. I don't like that analogy of saying, well, somebody told me to go this way, so I'm going to go that way. I'm going to go with the thing that's most reasonable. But the thing is everybody exercises faith. You don't know that green tomorrow is going to mean go, but you have faith that it will, because it's reasonable to think so, because that's the way you look at the past, the way things have happened. Every one of us has faith every moment of every day. You're understanding that the word yes and no mean the same thing as we're having this conversation. It's not going to change. So the question is not whether we should have faith or not have faith. It's whether we have a good faith or a bad faith, whether it's substantially reasonable. And so what I'm saying when I'm talking about that analogy with the thing, many people, it takes very little information to be a Christian. And there are many people who believe in Christ with very little information, and they're very, in many ways, foolish and ignorant in their faith, but they still have a true faith. But that's not the kind of faith that God desires. In the book of Hebrews, it rebukes the Hebrews because it said, you should be eating meat by now, yet I'm having to give you milk. So what we need to do is we need to apply our minds. Like I said, David, we're living in an age of anti-intellectualism, especially in the church, but I think in all of culture. And we are actually, it's recapturing, I think the Reformed Baptists are kind of on the vanguard of this. We're recapturing a pre-Enlightenment way of doing religion where you're using your mind. and you're valuing things. We've been living in an age that denigrates the mind. The religion does, and it's almost considered to be faith. Let's see. Contradiction is the hallmark of faith, is what some of the liberal scholars used to say. Because God is so great, he can't be held within the confines of logic. That kind of stupid talk is what has infiltrated the church and much of our culture today too. And that's not biblical Christianity. We need to be reasonable. I'm passionate about being reasonable.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing in that way. But I mean, I could go on forever, but that sounds like a miracle. A miracle is literally a contradiction of the natural order, correct?
Yes, but it's not something that somebody told you has happened. Therefore, believe me, because I said it. Roman Catholic Church does it a lot. You know, they have all these miracles they say happen that they don't happen. And
just, I want to hold you to that, because you said earlier that you believe that John is so credible in everything else. We trust that he said the miracle happened, and so we trust that the miracle happened.
Well, it wasn't just Luke. It was everybody around him, and it was Christ himself. There's a whole culture of everybody. Paul said that there are 500 people that saw the resurrected Christ in 1 Corinthians 15. He said, go ask them if you don't believe me.
So you're saying it's okay if more people do it, but it's just one person it's not.
If I say if I say that I saw a purple monster yesterday who told me to do 17 somersaults and the end of the world would happen, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's all of these prophecies, and these prophets are not just people just showing up like that. There is intimate prophecy that foretold the Messiah was going to come. We learn more and more about the Messiah as he comes. He was going to be from Abraham. He's going to be from David. He was going to be born in Bethlehem. He was going to suffer for the sins of his people. All these things, 300 prophecies about the Messiah. And Jesus comes and fulfills all of those. And John the Baptist, first thing he says when he sees him, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. It's not just these random things these idiot atheists want to say that there's no context to it. There's a rich context to it, and we need to take the whole thing as a package.
I mean, a cumulative case is right. Is that the term?
Well, some people base their Christianity on that. I don't know if you remember with Matt, I said that's evidentialism. I start with logic first, Romans 1 and Romans 2, and then I go to that stuff. So I'm starting. You have not rebutted my argument for creator and personal volition, which is moral law or value in existence, or teleology. Those are where I'm going to keep camping, and I'm going to keep camping. I want you to think about that.
Yeah,
that's where I'm starting. I'm not starting with the scriptures.
But I mean, the scriptures is where you're getting to the personal aspects.
You cannot have salvation. All that natural revelation you give you, Romans 1 and 2, is damnation. But you have to have special revelation for the message of salvation through Christ.
But I'm not
denigrating the special revelation. I'm just saying, though, the thing that you cannot refute, there's no way you can refute, is the first two arguments I made. I dare you to try it, because you haven't.
I still think I'm still proposing a world that could potentially been pushed, like the watchmaker.
That's an evidential argument, though. I'm not pushing evidence. I'm not pushing it. I'm a rational argument.
Analytically, you could say that something pushed it, and then in itself,
it would have to be self-existent after it was pushed.
It's not self-existent. It was made, and then it is. Well, gosh.
Okay, listen, my friend, I gotta go. I've got to get.
We're going to get into it again. I love it.
But let's keep in touch, and if you want to meet again, I'm very happy to do that.
Sounds good, Trey. I appreciate you.
You've been very kind and generous, and I love these conversations where we can just talk about things. And sometimes people will start filibustering with words. They'll just keep talking because they don't want to go to where we're going. But you've been very gracious, and certainly you haven't granted all my arguments, but hopefully it's something to think about. So, yeah. Okay.
Cool.
All right, David, we'll talk to you later, okay?
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good one.
You too.